Greetings. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Easton. Today I'm joined in this online service by other members of the fellowship who have worked together to prepare and perform music, prepare and present words of reflection, and to coordinate all the technology required at this difficult time. Participants in this recording are myself, Jean Ryan, Rita and Don Barker, Bojana Lamparska, Dave Moore, and Reverend Sue Browning, and Mark Walter. We're still practicing this new way of being together, and believe me, it's not as simple as I first thought it would be. While it's a time of anxiety, it's also a time of possibility. We're learning a lot quickly about being a fellowship online. A lot has changed in the last month, but what has not changed is our vision that we share. We aspire to be a loving community, uniting reason and spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and the world. The purpose of our fellowship is connection, and that's never been truer than right now. If you have family isolated in different parts of the country, invite them to join us here. If you have neighbors seeking a spiritual home, invite them to join us also. Dave Moore and Bojana Lamparska will now lead us in our first hymn, Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the giving life the shape of justice. Fruits hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Thank you, Dave and Bojana. Creating a loving community begins with welcome. So whether this is your first time meeting with us, whether you're a longtime member, or whether you just stumbled on this YouTube accidentally, you are welcome. We believe that everyone has worth and dignity, and everyone is interconnected. If you come here hopeful or heartbroken, whatever your age, gender, skin color, whomever you love, you are welcome here with us. We can all share in the warmth and love of this fellowship. Now is our opportunity to be together in spirit. Rita will now light our chalice.
We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. By its light, may our vision be illuminated. By its warmth, may our fellowship be encouraged. And by its flame, may our yearnings for peace, justice, and the life of the Spirit be enkindled. Now Jean will lead us in the reciting of our covenant.
The covenant of our fellowship. At the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Easton, we seek to nurture spiritual and intellectual growth for all ages, and to be actively involved in community outreach and service. cherishing diversity and celebrating our oneness with all humanity, we covenant to support each other in the spirit of compassion, respect, and love. Rita will now share Thoughts for All Ages, and that will be followed by our anthem from Dave Moore.
Hello. We've just completed 5 weeks of social distancing. That's 5 weeks of not going to school, most people staying home from work, not going to see our friends. It was 5 weeks of practically staying away from everything. And it's a bit crazy. It's not normal, but it is necessary. And when we're going through times like this, I'm reminded of some advice from a very wise and caring person. His name is Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers says that when you hear of news that worries you, look for the people who are helping. So during this time of the virus, and we all have to stay away from one another, we are still finding ways to help each other. So we're learning, first of all, that everyone needs to have masks to go outside to keep us safe. But since everyone needs one, there aren't very many around. So people are making masks. My sister Sharon is. There are ladies in our fellowship who are making masks. And it's in the news too, of people helping, making masks, and donating them to the people who need them. And you can see too, kids are getting involved with helping make face masks. Also in the news, we see people and companies helping by donating the food that the nurses and the doctors at the hospitals need. Doctors and nurses are spending many hours in the hospital taking care of the many patients there are now. So this has been very helpful. One of my favorite bits of news is learning about the people who have been adopting animals from the shelter. An animal shelter in LA and also one in Chicago both said that for the first time ever, all of their kennels were empty because all of their animals got homes. They were adopted and brought into homes. And my other favorite bit of news is of children doing things to help brighten a stranger's day by drawing pictures and hanging them up in their windows, also writing nice messages on the sidewalk with chalk, and also drawing pictures. So people, strangers, when they walk by, kind of brightens up their day. So even though we have to stay far away from each other, we can still spread joy to other people. Last week, Ellie and Eamon spread some joy by sharing their talents. Ellen used her beautiful voice and sang a song for us during service, and Eamon played the piano. And now, Dave is going to share his talent with us. He's going to be singing a song called Day's Done. And I'd like you to listen real carefully to the words of the song. As a father reassures his son, helps his son who's worried feel calmer.
Tell me why you're crying, my son. I know you're frightened like everyone. Is it the thunder in the distance you fear? Will it help if I stay very near? I am here. And if you take my hand, my son, all will be well when day is done. And if you take my hand, my son, all will be well when the day is done. Day is done. Day is done. Day why I'm sighing, my son. You shall inherit what mankind has done, in a world filled with sorrow and woe. If you ask me why this is so, I really don't know. And if you take my hand, my son, all will be well when the day is done. And if you take my hand, my son, all will be well when the day is done. 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 Tell me why you're smiling, my son. Is there a secret you can't tell everyone? Do you know more than those that are wise? Can you see what we all must disguise through your loving eyes? And if you take my hand, my son, all will be well when the day is done. And if you take my hand, my son, all will be well when the day is done. Day is done. Day is done. Day is done. Day is done.
What lovely words and music. Thank you, Rita and Dave. We will now join in meditation. We will share words by Nancy Wood. It is our quiet time. We do not speak because the voices are within us. It is our quiet time. We do not walk because all the earth is all within us. It is our quiet time. We do not dance because the music has lifted us to a place where the Spirit is. It is our quiet time. We rest with all of nature.
Good morning. First, I want to offer gratitude for the team that has put this service together. It has truly been an act of love. So deep, deep thanks to everyone. I also just want to make sure to offer my thanks to the many throughout the fellowship who have been doing outreach and care to one another. There has been so much going on behind the scenes to care for this community we love in so many ways. It is just beautiful to watch. I know as I have touched base with my own friends and family and touched base with members of the congregation, I still hear this resilience, I still hear this energy and this fortitude, but I'm also starting to hear a different weariness. Hearing people ask, when is this going to be done and how is it going to end? And just when we're trying to look to the end, we're told we're going to wear face masks in the stores when we shop. So it is still a very challenging time, and I just want you to know my heart and soul are just with you as everybody goes through this in their own way. To varying degrees, I think we each have a sense. We have a sense when the patience, our personal patience, ebbs and flows. We have a sense of boredom, ebbing and flowing, and a sense of our concerns doing the same, and our hopes too. They ebb and flow, and part of the beauty is that they happen. We're not all at the same place at all the time, so together we can help one another work through this. I'm also hearing about folks that are sort of getting back to some of the regular things, figuring out how to celebrate birthdays and how to talk about books and movies they've seen in all sorts of different ways. I can honestly say I'm a little jealous of the gardeners. I think the gardeners amongst us are pretty much the happiest ones I see. They're planting, they're tending to their gardens, they're excited as they imagine new growth. So I'm not one of those gardeners, but I know there are folks cooking and sewing. whatever you're doing to walk through these days, my hope is that you're finding places of connection, places of creativity, and that you know your congregation is here. If you're not sure how to reach out to me, reach out through the office. We'll connect you with somebody for a phone call or whatever is helpful for you at this time. And now I have the privilege of offering our joys and sorrows this morning. I'm going to go ahead and light the candles first. It's a common tradition in our church to do joys and sorrows, and during this time of the virtual services, we ask that you email the joys and sorrows into me by noon on Friday. So we light our first candle today, as we have over these last weeks, for the losses associated with the virus. The places that folks have been sick, the anticipation of illness, and we light this too for the medical teams, the first responders, and all of those who are serving us, from our educators to those working in the grocery stores and in transportation, that are working to keep us safe and keep us fed and cared for. I light the second candle. Rita asked me to light this candle, and she shares that her brother-in-law's brother, Tommy, did die from the COVID virus. He did have other illnesses, and part of her sorrow is that the family won't have a chance to have closure and to do what folks do when someone dies in your family. So we light this candle in love. And our final candle today is for everyone who is somehow involved in distance learning. I hear my husband tutoring over the phone, I talk to our teachers, and I talk to our students. The systems are imperfect, and I know it is challenging. It's probably one of the biggest challenges. There's a lot of learning going on, but it is hard, and we light the final candle today for those students. So I ask you just to take a moment to hold what we've heard, and for those joys and sorrows that remain in your heart. Amen, and blessed be. And now it is wonderful that Mark will be offering our message this morning. Stay safe, be well.
Good morning, or whenever it is that you happen to be joining us. I hope that you're all well during these challenging times. I'm going to begin my sermon by reading an opinion piece by Frank Bruni that appeared recently in the New York Times. Frank Bruni begins, "When the lockdown began, the orders to avoid travel, to avoid friends, to shelter in place, to shrink our worlds to the slightest physical dimensions endurable, my first impression was of how quickly and ingeniously we adapted. Abracadabra, classrooms went online. Physicians and therapists used Zoom to see patients. Happy hour happened on FaceTime. We're going to realize," he continues, "how much can be accomplished without the muss and fuss of meeting in person. Many of our activities will migrate into cyberspace forevermore." Weeks later, he suggests that he thinks the opposite. He says, "I know of exactly no one who's satisfied with this way of doing things. Friends who have scores of faithful email and text message correspondence tell me that they nonetheless feel out of touch and out of sorts. Colleagues who regarded the occasional opportunity to work from home as a gift concede that the office is looking better and better all the time. It has virtues beyond free pens and paper clips. It has, well, other people. I'm suddenly a digital whirlwind," he suggests, "exponentially more fluent in emoticons and emojis than before. I never knew there was such a bounty and such variety, but there's not a one of them no matter how colorful, that has the melting warmth of flesh and blood. A smile that's happening right in front of me, unmediated by keypad or keystroke. Bruni reports having read an article about the pressure on Facebook to manage the intensified use of the platform during this chapter of forbidden proximity. That subject interested him less than this particular passage. Quote, "The strain has been compounded by Facebook's workforce adapting to working from home, which had been discouraged in the past. The company's executives have long preached internally that face-to-face meetings and in-person collaboration were central to Facebook's success. The importance of in-person conversation was so great that employees at offices from Singapore to New York were frequently asked to travel to the company's headquarters in Menlo Park, California, for quarterly meetings. Think about that," he says. "The champions of digital connection don't actually believe in it when it comes to their own business. We're not wired for social distancing, that ugly new oxymoron. We didn't evolve to be physically separated from the humans at the core of our lives. It's unnatural. More than that, it's unhealthy." Frank Bruni discusses research that linked loneliness in elderly people to increased risks of heart disease, stroke, dementia, high cholesterol, diabetes, and even mortality. Bruni contacted the authors of that research to ask whether the use of digital communication could significantly mitigate those negative outcomes. They said that although the question was unanswerable in terms of the available science, they didn't believe in their hearts that the pandemic would teach us that such online connection is anywhere close to the real thing. The author of that scientific research noted that only 2 of our 5 senses, sight and hearing, come into play when we interact with someone online. That same author says that he's worked with older people for many years, and sometimes just putting a hand on their arm can make a big difference in being able to communicate with them. Bruni discusses a metaphor for digital versus actual encounters. An online conversation is a kind of like processed food. It's better than nothing. It's a convenience in the clutch, satiating in the moment, and easily consumed by enormous numbers of people. Some forms of it have some nutrition, but it's not an optimal or sustainable long-term diet. And it has additives that make it more alluring and more addictive. For processed foods, those are high fructose corn syrup, monosodium glutamate, and other natural and artificial flavors. For social media, those are likes, shares, and favorites, which confer a hollow affirmation from people who won't ever leave chicken soup at our doorsteps, or for that matter, cross the thresholds of our home. Bruni concludes his opinion piece by saying that he keeps thinking of those famous studies about the importance of touch to infants and how those deprived of it suffer greatly. We adults also suffer without it, if not quite as much. When we connect only via laptop and smartphone screens, there are no handshakes, no hugs, and when we clink glasses virtually, they don't make a sound. So that's the opinion piece from Frank Bruni. I think he makes a great point about just how much we need physical contact. The events that we find ourselves in make it clear that many overlook that fact. It is now clear that by overlooking the importance of physical contact, many adults living in isolation are now experiencing difficulties that were unexpected by all but a few experts. We need to not only be aware of the importance of human contact, but also to put this knowledge into action. People, whether it's the elderly, children separated from their parents at the US-Mexico border, people suffering in hospitals, any of us can benefit from human contact. I was originally going to read Frank Bruni's opinion piece as my entire sermon and focus on the negative effects of this social distancing. But after giving it some thought, it struck me that he overlooks a lot of the positive experiences that people might be having during this challenging time. Bruni states that he knows of exactly no one who's satisfied with this way of doing things. It got me thinking that that's not true for me. I actually do know a few people who are finding the positive in our current predicament. Specifically, the people that I know that are happy are those that are getting more family time, getting to know other people for the first time, or simply getting to reconnect with family. I know, for example, that I appreciate the greater time that I'm spending with Jamie, Ellie, and Lydia. Maybe I'm just trying to find the silver lining in our current situation, but it seems to me that social distancing is also creating social togetherness. We're spending more time having family meals, playing games, going outside together, while at the same time staying away from others. In all honesty, I'm going to miss this time that I'm able to spend with my family. I'm especially cognizant of this with Ellie, as I know that she'll be leaving for college in the fall. And when we talk about spending time together, we can't forget about our pets. I have 2 dogs that are thrilled that we're suddenly spending all of our time at home. I also have 2 cats, one of which is also thrilled with our newfound togetherness. The other cat, well, let's say she likes her alone time. And of course, the increased time spent with our pets isn't just making them happy. Research shows that petting a dog can make us increasingly resilient to difficult times. I also see positives coming out of having moved my classes online. Now that I'm Zooming with my students, I'm seeing that people that never talk in class are suddenly sharing ideas in Zoom, and particularly with the chat option. I think it's important to not overgeneralize, and to some extent, I think that's what the author of the opinion piece is doing. Different people will react differently to this situation. Some will, of course, experience negative effects as a result of this pandemic, but some may actually thrive in these difficult times. As I watch the nightly news for updates on COVID-19, and I sometimes think that I watch way too much news, I of course hear about all of the tragedy that the virus is causing. But at the end of each newscast, there's always an uplifting story about how people are rising to the occasion and taking care of their neighbors. I have to admit that I don't often think about Bible verses, but as I watch these uplifting stories on the news, I can't help but think about the story of Cain and Abel. When Cain asks God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" I don't think Cain realizes it, but the answer is clearly yes. We have an obligation to each other, and that's especially true during these challenging times. These uplifting news stories include people shopping for and bringing food to the elderly. A group of teachers formed a caravan and drove around a neighborhood wishing their students well. A group of police officers in Spain entertained a neighborhood with song and dance. A group of healthcare workers were surprised with free groceries on their trip to the supermarket. I could go on and on with these examples, but you get the picture. In the article, Frank Bruni focuses on the negatives of not having social contact. But I think a possible positive outcome may be increased willingness for employers to allow for a greater amount, not completely of course, of telework. While there are many reasons why increased telework may be beneficial, the climate change activist in me is happy to see that people are driving and flying far less than before. This has caused pollution in general and greenhouse gases in particular to fall not just in countries, but across entire continents. Some of the satellite images of pre versus current air pollution over major cities show dramatic differences. An article in the BBC on March 29th by Martha Henriques cites research that suggests that after an extreme event, people have a tendency to maintain the behaviors that were started during the emergency rather than going back to their old ways of doing things. A 2001 study in Japan, for example, found that after a roadway closed, forcing drivers to use public transportation, many people continued to use public transportation even after the roadway was reopened. Today, being Earth Day, I'm hopeful that on the other side of this pandemic, we might come away with an increased awareness of how our actions lead to increased greenhouse gases, and more importantly, that we have the ability to adapt our actions for the good of the planet. In an article that is making its way around the internet, Julio Vincent Gambudo refers to our current situation as the Great Pause. In this article, he suggests that we shouldn't be too eager to return to the way life was before this Great Pause. Instead, we have a chance to reset what we think of as normal. As we emerge from social distancing, and we will emerge from it, let's take a moment to think about the lessons that this event can teach us. This incredibly rare event has provided us with an opportunity to see what's really important. Human contact is critical to our happiness, but on this Earth Day, let's also remember the many things to be joyful for. I'll finish with a quote from Henrique's BBC article. She concludes her article by stating that it's safe to say that no one would have wanted emissions to be lowered in this way. COVID-19 has taken a grim global toll on lives, health services, jobs, and mental health. But if anything, it has also shown the differences that communities can make when they look out for each other. And now, please join Dave and Bojana for our closing hymn.
We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which finds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge to ourselves to greater service, with love and justice strive to make us free.
Thank you to Mark, Dave, and Bojana. It's been a treat to be working with you. Rita Barker will now extinguish our chalice.
Take the flame with you, for we are one, and from every window our light will shine.